Hi, my name is Becky Rose, and this is another video on After Forever After, my role-playing game coming out, hopefully in 2017. So I've had a question from Lord Morbius, who wants to know, does this game cater to both the storytelling players and the hack and slash players? Well, it can, but it was designed primarily as a storytelling game. It has a lot of non-combat skills, which you can draw on, and it, to put it bluntly, has a very fatal combat system, designed to encourage players to think twice about entering combat. It should be, we're going to have to fight, guys, rather than tally-ho! And that is very much a deliberate design decision. Now, the way I've achieved that is because the way the cards work in the game, a surprise hit, a good hand, a lucky shot can kill even an experienced adventurer in one hit. However, if you're wearing armour, that's less likely to happen. So if you want to do a hack and slash adventure, start off all your characters with some level of armour. Having armour definitely changes the nature of the game and moves it away from a really fatal combat system to one where you do, to a certain extent, get a bit whittled down, but that's where the game again gets interesting. You do get injured in this game. It's still a hit point based system because I wanted that simplicity, that ease of play that games like D&D have, but what happens is, as you gain more wounds and your hit points come down, your ability to act gets impaired. You start getting, for an ease of explanation, I'll say you start getting disadvantages on your actions. I don't have an advantage and disadvantage mechanic in the same way as D&D. I have an advantage and disadvantage mechanic, but it's it's more subtle. Like in D&D, you know, that whole rolling 2d20, that's quite a powerful boost. In this game, you can have multiple advantages stacked, and that's not overpowering. You could have 10 advantages if you wanted to. It's probably a few too many, but you probably have 2 or 3 at most in some extreme circumstances. But you can also have disadvantages in the same way. The point is, once you've started taking wounds, you're less effective in combat and much more likely to retreat from that fight. You can be beaten long before you're killed. Because once you're wounded, you're putting yourself at serious risk by carrying on fighting, because you've no longer got the ability to dodge blows in the way you could before. You're getting worn out, you're wounded, you know, you're in pain. So yes, the game can work for the hack and slash player, and I would argue that you get a much more realistic game as a result, but at the same time, it's actually designed to encourage that more storytelling approach to play. That's the raison d'etre of the game, that's the reason behind a lot of its design philosophies. I'd also, if you're doing a hack and slash game, that tends to be a game where there's lots of decision-making moments in terms of, in a normal RPG, a lot of dice rolls. And at that point, if you're doing lots and lots of combat in a card-based system, particularly a system like After Forever After, where you're doing you're playing a hand of cards against the other players, then that process, you know, if you're doing lots of that, then what you're effectively doing is playing the card game instead, rather than as it's designed, which is to be a game within the game, a sub-game. If you're doing a true hack and slash, where you're charging into loads of godwings or boglins, then really you're probably better off playing a dice game. I think I would find that more interesting in the sense that you'd focus on the combat rather than this sub-game, which perhaps presents the whole card game in a negative light, but actually it is a really good card game, and I have played it just as a card game in its own right. But I think if you're playing a role-playing game, the cards are supposed to add flavour and not take over. So if you're doing that kind of hack and slash where almost everything's dice rolling, nobody's describing their actions, nobody's adding colour or personality to the characters, then I'd argue that you probably want a game like D&D, which is really designed for that kind of play, as opposed to a game like After Forever After, which is engineered more towards the story side. But definitely, yes, you can do it. And I think for some groups who are into that kind of thing, I think the extra realism and the nuances of the different weapons would certainly add something that those type of players would otherwise not have. You know, the nuances of having to react to somebody wearing different armour by using different weapons, and the way that the different weapons behave against each other that will impact the tactics you use in combat, is not something I think other games offer. So I think there's definitely some merits to playing After Forever After for a hack and slash style of game. I just don't know whether it would have the longevity of something like D&D in a group that didn't do any storytelling.